The air tastes of metal and thunder. A stadium hums like an enormous, expectant animal, lights slicing through dusk, the track shimmering like wet obsidian, the roar of thousands, a low drum that vibrates beneath the skin. In the center lane a man stands with the stillness of a statue and the heat of a volcano. He breathes in the night and lets the crowd enter him, transforms their noise into a single, precise purpose, to explode forward. This is a moment condensed from a lifetime of mornings in empty gymnasiums, from icy runs when his breath hung like lanterns in the gutters, from tiny sacrifices woven into ordinary days until they became armor. He is not the loudest name in the record books, not the most famous face on billboards, but he carries an oxygen-slow faith that has been distilled into speed and grace. In his legs there is the memory of a boy who discovered the world by outrunning his doubts, who learned to listen to the whisper of his own bones and answer with motion. In his eyes is the map of every finish line he's ever imagined, some achieved, some lost, all teaching him how to rise again. Picture him as a silhouette against a single spotlight, head bowed, hands on knees, heart a hammer that measures time. The camera moves in slowly, closes on a face that has learned patience through pain, focus through fear. You feel the past unwind, summers of scraped knees and backyard races, winters of lonely laps under sodium lamps, conversations with coaches that read like prayers, nights where doubts sat across the table, and they traded glances. He is a man of small rituals, an old stopwatch, a worn pair of spikes, a notebook where he writes the margin notes of his life. He writes times and then writes feelings. He writes, "Stay hungry," in the same hurried script he used as a child to sign his name. That phrase will become both a command and a comfort. Listen, the starter's gun cracks like lightning, and for a sliver of a second the world reduces to the straight line of the lane, the measured fall of foot to track, the art of converting thought into motion. He runs not because he seeks escape, but because running is the way he prays. Each stride is a sentence in the story he tells himself. I can, I must, I will. Yet behind every satisfying finish is 1,000 tiny heartbreaks, training injuries that came at dawn, competitions lost by a fingertip, personal dilemmas that stretched across seasons. This story is not only about medals, it's about the space between aspiration and arrival, and how one man chose to fill that space with discipline, courage, and relentless curiosity. We will follow him from the first spark, the childhood in which a patchwork of neighborhood streets becomes his early arena, through the complicated passages of adolescence and adulthood where decisions had gravity. We will step into the raucous joy of victories and the gray hush of defeats. We will stay in the hospital rooms and dressing rooms, in the solitude of midnight training, and in the bright, aching glee of personal bests. We will hear imagined conversations with coaches, with rivals, with a young lover who believes in him in ways he cannot yet bear to trust. We will witness a relationship with sport that shifts from youthful gobsmacked delight to disciplined craft to a mature partnership where he learns to steward his body and heart. We will linger on the defining races, not with date stamps and statistics, but as human dramas, where the crowd leans forward, where the announcer's voice becomes the soundtrack of a dream. We will explore the rituals, the setbacks, the breakthroughs, the quiet joys that never make headlines, and the public lauds that can't hold the real cost of glory. We will watch him become, against weather and age and expectation, a craftsman of speed and a teacher of resilience. And finally, we will sit with him as he contemplates life after the stadium lights, wondering what it means to be someone whose identity has been braided with motion, how to pass the flame, how to remain whole. You will hear the cadence of his breath and the whisper of spikes on tartan. You will feel the taste of salt and chalk and the electric pressure of a stadium waiting. Above all, you will come to understand that his story, while uniquely his, belongs to anyone who has ever faced a long climb and decided to run. Now, let us begin, and walk, or rather, run, with him through the full arc of a life carved in seconds. He was born into a small house where the radio was a steady companion and the calendar on the wall marked more than holidays. It kept track of seasons of work and promise. The streets outside were not designed for champions. They were narrow, practical arteries linking bakery to bus stop. Yet somewhere between those blocks he learned geometry in motion, how to cut a corner, how to measure distance with a step, how speed could be coaxed out of small spaces. His father rose early, hands deep with labor. His mother sewed pockets in old coats and sewed courage into quiet conversations. They taught him that work mattered and that excellence was not sensational but habitual. But it was the first time he ran for the pure, ridiculous joy of it, the way a child runs when the day is endless, that changed him. He remembers the sheer absurdity of moving faster than everyone else in the neighborhood and the way the world widened when he did. Running became not a thing he did but breath. Schoolyard races turned into regional meets, and regional meets into the taut world of athletics clubs, where order and obsession lived side by side. He met a coach who saw in him not only legs but temperament, calm under pulse, stubborn in training, open to correction. Lean into the discomfort, the coach would say, voice steady as a metronome. He learned to love the microscopic improvements, shaving a tenth from a split, pushing an extra rep, arriving at the track before dawn. Training became a ritual of meditation and revolt, meditation in the rhythm of breath and revolt against every reason his body might give to stop. He discovered that his head is the loudest muscle. If he could quiet fear and amplify resolve, his body would follow. There were injuries, as inevitable as winter. The first was a tear that sent him to a sterile hospital room lit by fluorescent honesty. Lying there, charts and beeping machines reminding him of fragility, he felt the ego that had been buoyed by speed sink like a stone. This is a test, his coach said, but tests are small comfort when pain is a daily resident. Recovery was not linear. It started as anger, then became patient work, then humility that rewires how a runner approaches movement. He learned to listen. Physical therapists taught him subtler languages of alignment and balance. Sleep taught him a respect for restoration. Nutrition became a scaffolding of performance rather than a set of rules. The comeback was not cinematic in its speed. It was a long series of truth-telling sessions with himself. You will ask for little victories and you will celebrate them without shame. On the track, he tasted the sweet bitterness of near misses. Finals where he led and then lost by the smallest margin taught him the cruel arithmetic of milliseconds. He remembers one race in particular where the noise folded into a hush just before the final bend, when the lane ahead looked like an invitation and the world narrowed to the sound of his heartbeat and the cadence of his coach's words in his head. He leaned into the curve and felt his legs become instruments tuned by years of practice. He reached the line with lungs burning and found a medal around his neck that was neither heavy nor light. It was simply honest. The camaraderie in the athletes' village became as significant as the podium. Late-night conversations about training philosophies, the sharing of pre-race rituals like talismans, the superstition of eating the same breakfast before a big meet, these are the threads that weave a life of sport into a community. His lifestyle was austere in a way that felt rich. He cultivated friendships that were simple and unassuming, a teammate who could make him laugh when the pressure tightened, an old neighbor who brought stew after a taxing meet, a girlfriend who kept the steady home flame while his world spun at 200 meters per minute. He loved music that matched the cadence of intervals, simple meals that restored rather than indulged, and the solace of reading biographies of people who had been relentless in quieter arenas. He collected small things, a stopwatch worn smooth at the edges, a pair of spikes with the logo rubbed to a ghost, a journal filled with notes about the weather and how it affected times. In moments of downtime he would tinker with technique as an instrument maker tunes his strings, imagining angles and forces and how subtle adjustments changed outcomes. Competition sharpened him but did not harden him. He learned to see rivals not as villains but as necessary mirrors. In one memorable season he faced an opponent who pushed him to redefine the very idea of pacing. They would meet at the same meets, shake hands in the tunnel, trade tips about footwork, and then go out and bury everything in explosive, beautiful violence on the track. He remembers exchanging a grin with that rival once, both of them exhausted, both aware that in the heat of the race they had offered each other the perfect interpretation of sportsmanship: lose with dignity, win with humility, and always come back ready to try again. There were breakthroughs, those luminous moments where training and faith intersect. He discovered the importance of periodization, when to do hard work and when to let muscles knit themselves into something stronger. He learned to use technology, simple video analysis that revealed the tilt of his torso, the fraction of a second he lost by a less than perfect latch to the track. Small changes accrued into transformation. One winter, after months of recalibration, he felt the alchemy of refinement. There was a trial race on a bitter day. He felt the ice of the track in his heels and then that strange, fierce warmth that signals everything is aligned. He crossed the line and looked at the clock. The number was a punctuation mark in a slow sentence of progress. Teammates shouted, coaches clapped the hands that had once felt uncertain, and he stood, drenched in the effort of a body that seemed newly himself. Yet glory is not only performance, it is also a conversation with failure. He remembers a championship where everything went wrong. The starting blocks slipped, a gust of wind bullied his rhythm, a muscle tightened like a rope. He finished not at the top but with a lesson carved into his marrow. It was a humbling night, a raw demonstration of how fragile preparation can be when events conspire. He sat in the locker room afterwards and let the quiet do its work. He wrote in his notebook about how easy it is to confuse a moment for a career, and how necessary it is to separate identity from outcome. It was a pivot point. From that day, losses became data rather than defeat. He rebuilt with patience. As time passed, the public's attention came in gentle ripples rather than tidal waves. He wasn't a tabloid fixture, but he had the respect of his peers and the affection of a devoted fan base who understood nuance. Reporters liked his honest answers. Children liked his accessible posture. He started to mentor younger athletes, not with grand speeches but with practical advice. Own your mornings, he would say, and treat recovery like training. He learned to teach the quiet arts of preparation, how to journal, how to plan meals that nourish and race day pancakes that are ritual rather than superstition, how to run curves with a patience that looks like courage. In coaching, he found another rhythm, the thrill of seeing someone else's eyes widen when a technique clicks, the satisfaction of offering a correction that unlocks a whole season of potential. Off the track, he pursued interests that balanced the adrenaline of competition. He took joy in photography, the way a frozen frame can tell a story, catching a fellow athlete in an expression that suggested a private triumph. He liked to cook, to measure spices the way he measured splits, and to host small gatherings where laughter became a different kind of training, for patience, for presence. He volunteered in youth programs, believing that sport could be a scaffold for discipline and confidence. He also allowed himself the rare luxury of boredom, afternoons where nothing was scheduled, where the mind could unspool and imagine different futures. There were intimate dialogues that shaped him. On a rainy evening he sat with his mother, linens folded, rain making a quiet patter on the windows. "What will you do when the running stops?" she asked, not with malice but with the practical concern of someone who loves another person's life. He had not an answer then, only the recognition that identity would need to morph. Over time he found it in translation, in teaching, in community work, in the slow business of advising. The track taught him economics of effort, and he applied that economy to other domains of living. Memorable events peppered his career. There was the season opening meet where he surprised even himself with a start so clean it felt like poetry. There was the outdoor championship where a late burst carried him across the line and the crowd seemed to fold around him like a blanket. There was the year he pushed personal bests and felt his name rise in conversations that once barely whispered it. Each event had its own smell, gunpowder tang, rain on rubber, sunscreen and hot metal, and its own choreography of nerves and ritual. Spectators reacted as if they were at once audience and accomplices, their cheers a tidal force lifting him forward. The greatest achievements in his story are not silverware boxed in closets but the inner shifts that harden into character. He learned to marry ambition with equanimity, to treat setbacks as tutors not tyrants, to cherish the work rather than the applause. When he stood on podiums, the medals were celebration and measure, but they did not define him. What defined him was a willingness to continue after disappointment, to keep arriving with curiosity. Toward the end of his competitive arc, he made choices that felt like both surrender and wisdom: less travel, more local meets, focused mentorship. He began to write down the structures that had carried him: workout templates, mental scripts for starts and finish line drives, checklists for recovery that read like recipes. Young athletes came to him for guidance, and he welcomed them with an attentiveness that was both teacherly and tender. "Your race is an extension of your life," he would say to a nervous teenager, "not its whole story." That perspective saved many young competitors from the exacting trap he knew too well. There came a final season that was quieter than the first but more satisfying in its terms. He still felt the rush of race day, the particular nervous electric in the chest, but he was gentler with himself about outcomes. He allowed the crowd's roar to be a gift rather than a demand. After the last official competition, he felt a strange mixture of grief and relief, the same double helix he had felt after earlier injuries and recoveries. He walked into a subdued locker room, took off his spikes, and for a moment let the echoes of applause linger like a benediction. In retirement, he built a life that honored motion without being possessed by it. He coached, yes, but he also wrote essays on the nature of courage, taught workshops on the psychology of performance, and continued to run, sometimes fast, sometimes just to feel ergo by his face. He became a quiet figure at local meets, cheering near the tape, offering one-line corrections to those who asked. He learned to celebrate other people's victories with the untroubled joy of someone who knows how hard they were earned. There is a final image that lingers, a cinematic freeze frame, an older man, slightly stooped from the passage of years but with an alertness in his eyes that speaks of inner motion, kneeling to tie the laces of a child's tiny spikes. He looks up and meets the child's wide, eager stare. "Run," he says with a smile that is both command and benediction, "but also listen to why you run." The child nods, as children do, and the man's hands linger a second longer on the shoe as if passing time itself through leather and lace. If there is a lesson crouched in his journey, it is this: greatness is rarely the product of raw, untempered talent alone. It is patience married to intention, curiosity converted into method, compassion braided into competitiveness. He treated every failure as a tutor, every triumph as a waypoint, and every day as a chance to be slightly better. That is how his seconds accrued into a life worth remembering.